For those of you who joined us after we began this morning's program, I'm Mike Tucker, the president of the Center for Economic Growth, and CEG is very pleased to co-host this forum, Tech Valley and Beyond, Growing Sustainable Infrastructure at the Speed of Life with National Grid. We've had a very, very exciting morning. We've had a great presentation by our co-host, Sherry Warren, as well as our good friend, Dr. David Cooper-Ryder. We were really excited to have Puck McElby, as well as Richard Kaufman, and now we get into a regional, state, and global economic development and infrastructure panel. As most of you know, the Center for Economic Growth is our 11-county regional economic development organization, and infrastructure is one of the three primary focuses of our new strategic plan, along with workforce, education, and entrepreneurship. We believe that we have to have the infrastructure in place to allow us not only to expand and grow our region in a sustainable fashion, but as importantly, to be able to compete nationally and globally, to attract the companies and expand existing companies using the 5 industry cluster sectors that we identified several years ago in a survey by Rensselaer's Lally School of Management: semiconductors, information technology, biotechnology, clean energy, and advanced materials. We have a tremendous manufacturing base and work ethic here for more than 100 years. We all know that that manufacturing base subsided in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but we work very closely with the Chief Executives Network for Manufacturing, and over the last several years, and mostly in the last 6 or 8 months, we've really started to see the needle move in terms of manufacturing expansion and opportunity in the region. And if we're going to truly leverage the public-private investment that's been made in our region over the last 15 years, the collaborative dialogues and discussions, the public sector investment, the private sector job growth, we are going to need to be sure that we have the infrastructure in place to absorb that expansion on a timeline that ensures that we don't have the blockages and the risks of not having what we need to sustain our region and its growth for the companies that are here and those who want to come here. And we have seen transformational growth from CNSC and Semitech to Global Foundries, GE, Regeneron, the supply chain companies locally who are growing and expanding to serve them and those who are here. And all these activities have provided the region with tremendous opportunities, but at the same time demand that we move faster than ever so that we're poised to realize those returns. And whether it's water and sewer, whether it's air or water transportation or rail, whether it's broadband, whether it's gas or electric, whether it's education or some of the softer infrastructure components that really we will discuss in future conferences, we need to be prepared for the future. And our panel today really helps us do that. We have Bill Hart from Irving Tissue, who, as you know, serves on the Governor's Capital Region Economic Development Council. Bill is the chair of the council's infrastructure work group. Bill will give us a true view of where the council has evolved and its plan that was recently submitted, the recent progress report that was submitted to the governor. Steve Wilson from CHA led the Cleaner, Greener Community Sustainability Project. It was a grant that was provided to our region as well as to the other 9 regions in the state by NYSERDA to take a view as to how we can look at opportunities for sustainable growth and development. And he'll be able to give us a viewpoint, along with Bill, as to how that factors in to the regional council's effort. And we're very pleased to have with us Margaret Tobin, the Executive Director of New York Works, who was appointed by the governor to take a look at the assets and the funding of the infrastructure of the various state agencies, to really look how we can take advantage of synergies and opportunities to ensure not only that those funds are spent wisely, but also that those funds are spent in a prioritization and order that makes sense for the growth of New York State. We're also pleased to have Rick Whitney, the president of M&W Group US. Rick has been a longtime friend and advocate and supporter of our region while being responsible for a national construction and development business that is part of the M&W Group, headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany, and who does technology development and construction in 30 countries around the world. And obviously, Rick can give us the viewpoint of where we fit into that global equation. And we're fortunate to have Mike Relyea, the former president of the Luther Forest Technology Corporation, who will be able to give us an idea of, once you get the project, how do you adapt to the client? But more importantly, before you get the project, how do you adapt to the market to attract that tenant to your site? And so we'd like to get started with a 5-minute overview from each of our panelists. Welcome to our living room. And John McLaughlin, I'm not, but they told me to try it when we get to the interactive dialogue, and we'll save some time for questions from the audience. Bill?
Great. Thanks, Mike. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Before I get started, I just want to take an opportunity to thank and recognize National Grid and the Center for Economic Growth for their leadership in bringing us together for such a critical discussion about infrastructure. Can't say enough about those two. Thanks. And also to all of you for taking 2 days out of your busy schedules to come here to talk about this issue. You can tell how critical an issue it is if you can get somebody to come to a meeting for 2 days. I can't get somebody to a meeting for 1 hour on some topic, so that tells you how important this discussion really is, being infrastructure. I'm extremely excited to be here. As Mike told you, I'm a member of the Capital Region Economic Development Council, and I also work for a regional manufacturer, Irving Tissue. One of the things as I think about what we're doing here over the next couple of days, I think when Governor Cuomo really envisioned the regional council structure, this is exactly what he was talking about collaborative, bottom-up planning of your economic future by the communities in which you live. So kudos to all of you for coming, and this is exactly what we need to be doing. I've been asked to give you just a quick update on council activities in 2013, but I'll start with the formation of the council. It started in 2011 when Governor Cuomo organized this wonderful initiative. The first task for the Capital Region was to do two things. First of which was to come up with an economic vision of what we wanted to be, as well as a 5-year strategic plan of where we think we could take the region economically, given the resources of the state and various resources of our communities. So that was 3 years ago. And I'll tell you, we're 3 years later, and we've done a lot of really good things with the council. I'm extremely proud of what we've accomplished to date. But one of the things that hasn't changed to date is the vision that we came up with 3 years ago. And what we first did is we came up with a vision that we thought unified the region. And really, it was all centered around the creation of an economic ecosystem that was really driven by the private sector, academia, and government. Very similar to what you see here today. When we planned this event, we made sure that we had representation across all those very key sectors. So that was a key driver for us in terms of the vision of creating that economic ecosystem. And really, the ultimate goal is to create economic prosperity for all of us, all residents of the Capital Region, as well as the state of New York. And finally, the last piece of that vision was to really make this region a destination of choice for business, international investment, and world-class talent. And really, if I think about what's happened over the last couple of years here, we are definitely on track to continue to move forward with that vision. Since the day that I joined this council, infrastructure took an immediate and critical role in all of our deliberations. And it's one of our core goals. We have 8 core goals of the region. Infrastructure is one of them. We've deemed it to build the superhighway. And that's really an example of really going across multiple infrastructure sectors. But one of the things that the council did in 2013 is we said we wanted to go deeper with infrastructure. So we said we needed to put some real focus on this and really start to drive forward from an action-based perspective. So we created the infrastructure work group, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to lead that group. And the whole reason it's here, again, it's to execute our strategies, and it's to go deeper with our implementation. So that was the reason the group came together. So once we had that task in front of us, what I first did was look to assemble a team that showed expertise across all infrastructure sectors. And we were able to develop just a fantastic team. We were able to assemble a group with representation across 9 state agencies, 11 economic development / public organizations, and 8 major private sector employers across the region. We absolutely have the right people on this team making decisions about infrastructure for our future. So I know I saw a lot of you today. Can you please stand up so we can recognize you? Members of the Infrastructure Subcommittee. These are the people that really make it happen. This isn't a committee where we show up once every couple months and we talk. This is a working committee. We've met every month since February, and one of the things I just wanted to share with you today is what have we done, and share some of those accomplishments that are what I think are real significant start to a lifelong mission here in terms of getting the right infrastructure in place. So one of the first things we did is we defined our scope of infrastructure. And we landed on physical infrastructure, the type of infrastructure we've talked today. And we took a sector approach to our work. That was step number 1, to get our arms around what we're trying to accomplish. Number 2, and thanks to Gene Kelly for mentioning this earlier, we started with where are we? So we developed an infrastructure baseline by sector, really outlining what our assets, opportunities, and gaps were across all of our inventory sectors. The next thing we did is we created a funding summary that showed where are the funding streams that help applicants, organizations, and municipalities across our region to move your projects forward. Funding is one of the most critically important things when we talk about infrastructure, so we thought that'd be helpful for the region. That summary is actually in your workbook towards the end of it, and thank you to Linda Hill and the group at National Grid for including that. The next thing, and again, we've talked a lot about collaboration today. We spent an awful lot of time this year collaborating with public officials and public organizations to ensure buy-in with what we were trying to accomplish. So we've been able to collaborate with New York Works. The Cleaner Greener Plan has also been a group that we've collaborated closely with. The Adirondack Gateway Council, the Capital District's Local Government Council, and the local economic developers across our region. Critically important for us as part of our mission. The last thing, 2 more things. We also created a priority listing by sector. And again, we thought this was a very important thing for us to do because we wanted to step back and say, not just from a project perspective, but what are the priorities in terms of technology? What are the priorities in terms of site? What are the collaborative organizations out there that are doing transformative things? Those are the types of priorities that we want to highlight that help guide council decision making as we get into funding decisions and different things along those lines. So a critically important piece of work. And the last thing I wanted to highlight was our project development and solicitation efforts. One of the things, obviously, that we want to do is we want to move infrastructure forward. So bringing projects to light. What are the projects of the region? Our efforts this year of this work group were able to bring forward to this round of funding 34 priority project submissions and 126 CFA infrastructure applications, solely based on infrastructure. So great job by the group there. I guess, and just to wrap this up, it's been a great start. We're off to a very, very good start. We've developed a structure. So now when we start to talk about infrastructure issues, we have a group to talk with about it. And we cut across disciplines and across sectors to do so. We've defined our scope. So now when we talk infrastructure and people look at you like you have three heads, we know what it is, what are the things that are in our scope, and what is out of our scope. So you know, as an applicant, as an organization, as a municipality, where to go for questions and help and support. And we've also provided an open forum to be part of the solutions. And I encourage everyone in this room, if you're interested in helping us continue with those efforts, my work group, our work group is open. And it always will be. So we're looking for that critical input across the group and looking forward to just another outstanding year. Thank you.
Good afternoon, thank you. You know, I knew I was in a somewhat unique setting when this morning I heard Walmart and the Dalai Lama all in the same sentence. That's probably a first for me. Again, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm with CHA. Some of you may formerly known, we used to be called Clough Harbor. We kind of dropped that moniker a while back. But I had the chance to oversee what was the Capital Region Sustainability Plan, which came out of the governor's Cleaner, Greener program. It was funded through NYSERDA, through a grant with the City of Albany, who's a great partner on the project, along with CEG, helped us out throughout the process as well. If you're not familiar with the Cleaner, Greener program, it threw $100 million at the 10 regions in the state, with the first $10 million being for each region in the state to prepare a sustainability plan, with those regions matching their Economic Development Council regions. So for our purposes, it's from Columbia and Greene all the way up to Warren and Washington. It's the 8 counties. With the idea of each region preparing a plan that is similar to a degree, but still different enough so that it's specific to that region. And I have to hand it to NYSERDA. It was a great job herding cats in trying to get all these 10 plans done within about a year. We started in middle of last year, and we finally wrapped up the plan in June of this previous year. I'm sorry, June of 2013. And the plan covered 8 focus areas: water, solid waste, climate adaptation, economic development, land use and livability, transportation, and food systems. And these were consistent throughout the state, so that, again, the state had some metrics so that every region could be understood, or the whole state could be understood, while each region could adopt these focus areas as they saw fit. Subsequently to that, the remaining $90 million out of the Cleaner, Greener program is intended to fund projects or initiatives that came out of these plans for the next 3 years. Some of you are probably aware the first $30 million was in this previous CFA round with the intent, but obviously things change. 2014, there'd be another $30 million. In 2015, again, another $30 million. So the Cleaner, Greener program really had 3 major goals, with the third one really tying into what we're talking about here today. The first being establish sustainable land use policies. The second being promote sustainable growth. And the third, guide infrastructure investment. Those were the kind of the 3 mantras as we went through the process and what the plans were supposed to do around the state. And it's actually, it's quite an effort, because as far as I know, this is the first time we're the only state in the country that has really taken under sustainability plans at the entire state in that amount of time. So perhaps California and Oregon can look at certain areas and say they're on the same level, but we have the entire state, at least version 1.0 of their sustainability plans in place that are really going to guide things for years to come. And out of that process, our planning process, came essentially 27 priority initiatives that focused around those, that were built around those focus areas. And a lot of the ideas that were thrown around here this morning on visions for the future of the capital region, ideas on how we get there, are very reminiscent of these priority initiatives. They covered everything from promoting green infrastructure, creating a food hub, improving green jobs training, or expanding green jobs training programs, expanding the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. I know I heard that this morning. Expanding composting. It covered a wide gamut of issues well beyond infrastructure, but they all are integrated. And when we think sustainable, we have to think about these things all at the same time. I'm not going to try to trump the presentation this morning on sustainability because it was one of the best ones I saw, but he gave a great overview on how to approach it. So the idea of the 27 priority initiatives is to serve as a toolbox for communities who want to become more sustainable. I shouldn't say that, just not communities, organization, nonprofits, et cetera, that want to become more sustainable. They can look at these initiatives, go after some of the funding, try to implement these programs within their community, their organization, to again become more sustainable. The plan obviously showed, even before the planning process showed we were becoming much more sustainable. And I know a lot of the ideas were thrown out here today. You think about what's been going on in the region in recent years. We have a lot more investment in our downtowns. And I'm a firm believer, as the cities go, so does the regions. If the cities are not healthy, the rest of the region cannot be healthy. We've seen, obviously, huge growth in farmers markets throughout the region, so we're buying local more. A good example is CDTC's linkage program in the last several years. I forget the numbers, $50, $60 million, I think, in promoting bicycle, pedestrian infrastructure throughout the region. So we were definitely moving towards a more sustainable future, and the plan was designed to accelerate that process and provide a much more unified approach throughout the region. But like all plans, the plan is easy. The implementation is always the challenge. There's plenty of great plans sitting on shelves, but they never got implemented correctly. Obviously, there's several challenges. Funding, like everything else, is the number one. We have a lot of competing priorities. We're talking about $90 million spread across the entire state for 3 years. I mean, that the proverbial deck chair off to Queen Mary. I mean, that hardly goes far enough to address a lot of the issues we're talking about. You take for instance, EFC recently has indicated water and sewer infrastructure improvements alone in the capital district or capital region in the 8 counties is estimated at $2.5 billion just to improve our existing infrastructure. So there's a lot that's going to be needed to address a lot of these issues. I guess the other big thing that came out of the process, and it was, I think I heard it echoed to a degree in some of the things that were stated this morning, to a degree, besides the Economic Development Council does a great job for the region from that perspective, but we're not a region that thinks regionally. It's a new concept. Sustainability does not respect geographic boundaries. These issues require tremendous intermunicipal cooperation to fix everything from, how do we manage growth throughout the region? How do we fix our transit systems? Where do we invest our dollars? It requires a true regional approach to address some of these sustainability issues. So that really came through loud and clear in the planning process, that thinking regionally for the 8 counties is somewhat, at least in terms of sustainability. I know in terms of stuff the council has done and the infrastructure work, that's been underway for the last few years, but the notion of sustainability and planning from a regional level will and continue to be a challenge. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Great. Margaret?
Thank
Keep our
you.
lefts and rights together.
So I'm Margaret Tobin. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Works Task Force, which was set up a year and a half ago by legislature to take a look at our capital investment. I would hesitate to call it strategy because up until now I don't think it's particularly been very strategic. We have at this point over time created 47 agencies and authorities which invest capital dollars in our state. 47. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? That's a very big number. And I think where we have gotten to in the pressure on New York State and on the country is that we're in a global economy. We have, to quote the great Ross Perot, that giant sucking sound you hear of jobs going south or getting sucked out of and have been out of Rochester and Utica and Albany, et cetera. I've had the opportunity to travel around. I've been down to DC. I've been on panels with Brookings. I've been all around, pretty much between us, all of the RADCs, and kind of seen what's going on and been able to get down at grassroots level in terms of projects that are happening, how they get done. So sort of what I call the project management 101 aspect of government doing projects. I've looked at the strategic capital planning and allocation, and we pulled together this year for the first time a 10-year capital plan for the state of New York, rolling up all 47 agencies and authorities. And when you talk about what organizations got built up over time, there are certainly the political apparatus of the state is interesting, but when you call everybody an entity as opposed to an authority, at the end of the day, where the money comes from is taxes, tolls, fares, and fees. That's government revenue. That's 100% of the pie. And the third thing that we look at is finance, public finance. And there's all sorts of folks out and about talking about P3s and how to do it better and blah, 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 blah. And it's all great, but at the end of the day, it's all finance, it's all cash flow, it's all how you use debt, how does that work? So at the end of the day, what we have to do is grow the economy. And by growing the economy, it becomes a perpetual motion machine. So one of the things that I've looked at in being sort of having the opportunity to just talk to pretty much anybody I want to talk to and getting a chance to listen to folks, what I really see is something that I think it was Don Rumsfeld, was probably the place where I saw the quote first, which was, you know what you know, and you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know. And if we can together see what we all can see and share that in some way that's a seamless, flexible, resilient, and what was it our morning speaker said, take a gut punch, we'll be fine. So I have a huge amount of confidence in the state of New York. I've spent 10 years in government back in the day. I spent 10 years in the private sector. I've done a ton of projects in the real estate world, and I would say New York State has great real estate. That's what I would say. We have New York City, which is a phenomenal engine. We've got Montreal and Toronto. We're on the axis between Buffalo, which is really a Midwestern town, they'll tell you when you go out to Buffalo, and Boston. And we have phenomenal people, phenomenal natural resources. And so I'm very bullish on New York as an investor. One of the ways that I think about it is that we have 19 million shareholders, right? 19 million residents. So what's the division? I get a lot of stuff from people about public sector, private sector, which I personally find hilarious. I mean, we're all people. It's not really any different. And it's not like the public sector's over there on that side of the room, the private sector's over here. The reason infrastructure is so tricky is that it takes all of us together to do it, right? And when I say all of us together, I just mean, all of us as citizens deciding what it is we want to do. The second thing that I hear all the time, which I again find absolutely hilarious, is politics. We got to take politics out of decision making. I mean, I keep wondering, what do you have in mind? Like monarchy? Like who's going to decide? Like it's called self-government. Right? I haven't memorized the preamble, but that's what it's called self-government. And I constantly ask people, and do you know who your local assembly member is? Do you know who your congressional representative? I mean, the answer most of the time is no, folks don't. So the government folks that are doing their best job that they know how to do, given what they know inside the silo that they're in, are looking for help in how to think about it. So part of what we need to do is identify the projects that in and of themselves, the current apparatus is not set up to handle. So State DOT is a brilliant organization. It can pave roads like nobody's business. It knows how to pave a road. Does it know how to, multimodal is what they call it. Multimodal is anything that's not a bridge or a highway. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. I mean, somebody was joking with me that they used to be a bureau and now they're a desk, and pretty soon they're going to be a drawer in a desk. But we all know that freight rail, right? Intuitively, freight rail is way more cost efficient and way cheaper from a fuel efficiency point of view for shipping goods. But how do we get the current apparatus of government to shift and do what needs to happen? What I would say is where we're going is, where we've been is centralized, right? Command and control, the infrastructure czar, the sort of top down. We've heard a lot about that today. Then everybody goes over and we do bottom up, which is kind of the decentralized mode. So I'll tell you, one of the organizations I deal with all the time is DEC. I finally got the org chart, which is about this thick, and I think it was written by Richard Nixon starting in 1972. Like, it just kind of grew over time. DEC folks are wonderful. They're really smart. They know what they know, and they're very good at it. But when you get to our new world, right, that's the decentralized world, getting to the new world is what I call the distributed network. Somebody here called it the whole. It's like we are together, this is the organization of the Capital Region. We have folks from every part of the economy and every part of the political and business apparatus here. Together we could figure it out. It's just not that complicated. It can't be that complicated. We are a very wealthy state. When we added it up over the next 10 years, it's $174 billion. I mean, that's not no money. That's real money. And I would say there is no question that at least 20% of that, and probably more, is not properly allocated. So if you think about it, you probably have about $35 billion to do something different with it. How do we steer it, and how do we together figure out the smart, effective thing that will, in fact, create jobs for everybody, bring the bottom up to the middle, make this be a sustainable place and a really, pleasant, fun place to live, work, and do business. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Again, my name is Rick Whitney, President M&W US. And to build on some of what Margaret has just talked about, our company focuses on industries that have a very, very significant need for infrastructure to support our clients. So when we're talking about semiconductor companies, life science companies, biopharm, biotech, large consumer products companies, information systems, data centers, and the solar businesses, those are the core businesses of our company, and as Mike indicated, we're in 30 countries around the world. One of the things our clients ask us to do is to help them with site selections. And when we look at site selections, we're looking for a very wide range of site attributes, but I'll focus on the political climate, the supportive climate of the entity, the hosting entity, whether it's a municipality, a state, or a federal entity. And we look at the infrastructure and how that infrastructure can support the needs of the client that are immediate, that need to be brought to bear to build the facility and get the facility up and running, the infrastructure needed to operate the facility, and the infrastructure needed to provide our clients with the flexibility for their facilities going forward. So when we look at that need matrix and focusing on those areas, we see three very distinct models. There's the Asian model, which is a very state-driven, and by state I mean the federal, the national government, very state-driven model where the incentives, the land availability, the utility and fixed infrastructure, right down to the workforce, can all be coordinated, collaborated, and organized by the state entity. And even in democracies where we work, we can see that the state has a very heavy hand on major developments inside their areas. And now you contrast that to a more US centric model, which tends to be more privately driven, where the state has a much lighter touch and can guide and incentivize, but you're still working with a lot of private entities to develop the infrastructure, make the initial investments, and work through a self-governed environment to ensure that you can place a facility, do it properly within the rules and regulations, meet all the permitting requirements, and meet the sustainability requirements in that region. And in the middle, you have the European model, which tends to be a blend of those two. The state does have a heavier hand in Europe. They are able to steer with a little more strength on the wheel in Europe, but they also have a very high regard for sustainability and the rule of law, and being sure that the facilities are not harming the environment that they're being built in. So when we look at those areas and those requirements from the three different models, then we start looking at what our clients require. And what our clients look for when they're doing site selections and regional selections is they're looking for, of course, it's the incentives. The incentives do play a significant role in our client decisions. And incentives can run everything from grants to tax relief, and one of the areas that the Asians do have a very significant advantage is they provide significant tax holidays for clients that will make significant manufacturing investments in their areas. That's just one of their advantages. But our clients are also looking for their time to market. They want assurance that when they make a commitment and they engage their capital, that they know when they'll get a return on that capital. Again, it's one of the areas where we believe that New York is very good at. We look at the model here in New York State, and we see several very distinct advantages of what New York has done. We've all seen some of the incentive packages that have been put out there. Obviously, those can't continue forever, but we also look at the vision that the state has, which I think is unique in the United States, where 10, 15 years ago, they said, we're going to develop multiple pods for semiconductor investment. 15, 20 years ago, they said, we're going to create a nanotechnology center. The state was miles ahead of the competition in making those decisions, having that vision, and then putting action behind that vision in creating places such as Luther Forest, such as the Marcy Center, such as CNSC. And now we see with the results of those. We have a significant semiconductor client at Luther Forest. CNSC is a global model in private-public partnerships, and we're starting to see Nano Utica and the growth of that hub. So we see where vision and support can be successful. Where we see the challenges for New York is, where's the next location? Where's that next major hub of infrastructure? And what's being done to support the infrastructure to bring that hub to life? Because when the clients come in, they're looking for time to market. They are not expecting to take years to bring the infrastructure to their project. They're not expecting months or years to permit their facility. They're not expecting years to build that facility. When you look at the billions of dollars that a company such as GlobalFoundries will invest, their first fab was about, I think it's $8 to $10 billion. They don't want that investment exposed to an uncertain return. They want to know when they'll get the material out of that facility. So they need to know how long it will take to bring the infrastructure, how long it will take to build it, and then how long it will take to commission it. Following that, they're looking for how can they expand, what's their flexibility in enlarging their facility, what's their flexibility in having that infrastructure available when they do want to pull the trigger on that next $10 billion investment. So I guess the takeaway then is great success on some of the visionary sites that have been developed, some of the visionary programs that have been put in place, But then the question is, what's next? Where's that next node? Where's that next hub?
Thank you, Rick. My name is Mike Relyea. I'm the former president of the Luther Forest Tech Campus. Working with a lot of these folks here, and probably the majority of you in the room, if not with you personally, with your companies. So I've appreciated the support over the last couple of years, because I don't think you can do what we've done as a region in terms of the infrastructure build that we put on around this Luther Forest Tech Campus without a great deal of cooperation, and at times some pushing and pulling that had to go on there. But my role on this panel was to come in and talk about, we heard what Rick said, we've heard what Margaret and the rest of the team have said, but we kind of, in my experience, everyone looks around and goes, okay, now you go do it. Well, guess what? That's not easy to do. Planning it is fun and not all that difficult. But at the end of the day, you actually have to execute it. And how you do that is incredibly important, but also depends on the collaboration that you have around the room, not just in the amongst the businesses, but across all of the lines that we have, whether it be town lines, school district lines, union lines, organized labor, political lines. Everybody has to come together to get that done. And the biggest challenge, and one of the things that Linda had asked me to talk about here, was who pays for it? And I was very glad that we had Richard Kaufman here earlier, and he hit on this. The customer model that we have right now doesn't work in every instance, because I know if you just want to bring water to your home and there's no water line that's next to you, you have to pay to bring the water to your home. In some cases, that depends on how far the water is away, how much that's going to cost. And so you have to start to build this understanding that not only do we have to all work together, but we all have to figure out how we pay for that. And there's really two types of infrastructure that I've learned over the last year, and a couple of years. It's not just all the utilities, but there's this transmission level. You have to have big roads, you have to have big gas pipes, big water pipes, big power lines. But then you have to step those down, and you have to actually distribute it to the people who need it at the levels that they need it at. So when you start to look at the transmission level, well, we were lucky enough at Luther Forest, and this is a true point. There was a day before, it was a Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and we were on the phone with National Grid's gas team. And the gas estimates at Luther Forest for Global Foundries more than doubled. Well, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. What's bad about that is once it doubled, it then tripped a switch upstream to an entirely different animal of gas that was needed at our site that we no longer controlled. We had to go right to the suppliers and work with National Grid to figure out how we deal with that volume of gas. And then do we right-size those utilities on the way back down? So what that all boils down to, and kind of the part that I got to play in the most, was this distribution. Who's really paying for this? And as a customer, you go through the localities. The localities, everyone knows right now that all the local governments are cash-strapped. Budgets are really tight. So we've come up with some really nice ways of raising money called mitigation fees. I buried a power line in the town of Malta. I paid $1 million in visual mitigation fees, right? So there's ways that these local governments are using the development community to raise funds. Whether it's fair or right, you can be the judge of that, but again, somebody has to pay those fees to be able to operate in those towns and bring those utilities, whether they be roads or bridges or water or sewer. Someone's got to pay for that. You have the engineering soft costs as well that go into that. Probably the biggest challenge that we started with at Luther Forest, and it started well before me, was we didn't have a client. At the beginning of the time, when Rick first came on, we started to think we had a client when M&W was there, but we didn't have a client. So we were building a 9-mile power line connecting 2 power grids to a lot of trees. And that's tough to swallow. But if somebody didn't have that vision, and then somebody else didn't come up with the money to front end that capital expense, we wouldn't have gotten where we got to. And we definitely have lessons learned as we walk through that with the local municipalities, the local businesses, the local engineering firms. I think that's one of the things that we really have to continue to look at in this region is how do we collaborate first on getting the big pipe here and through your locality, and then how do we distribute it to those people who ultimately right now under the model we have are going to pay for it. So the taxpayers are on the front end paying for it, and then the end user is paying for it, but they're also taxpayers paying for it on the backside. So we have to find a different way of doing that. We have to coordinate that a whole lot better. I always would talk about, somebody said, well, we need to do a feasibility study. I don't even hear the word feasibility study. I hear $30,000. Every time someone says, let's do a feasibility study, just start ticking up the dollars. And at some point, your traffic studies, your feasibility studies, I have some really funny experiences that I'm trying not to share here in a public forum. But those all cost money, and someone's got to pay for that. And I guess that's the biggest thing. And one of the things that kind of hits with this group is who controls it. When you're trying to build, as we do in New York, and certainly Long Island and Sandy and Irene and all the things that have been happening to our infrastructure here in New York, it's different in Luther Forest. We had a big pile of sand to drive through. That was simple. I have a picture on my phone of the ground was open in New York City when I was walking down in Lower Manhattan one day, and they had a big, probably 40-foot by 40-foot hole opened up. It was supposed to be infrastructure and pipes. I was shocked at what was in the ground. I mean, New York isn't an island. They are literally sitting on tunnels of steel all over the place, and it's not brand new. So coordinating all of that, I think, is an understatement of trying to figure out how we get to where we're going. And I guess the final point really is, and I mentioned it before, is who controls it. At every level, there's somebody else controlling a decision, and we don't always have the leadership to push that decision down. You may have a regulatory decision being controlled by DEC or the EPA. You probably have a local zoning question or a permit or a, I forget what we call them in our neck of the woods, but somebody's controlling that. It could be one supervisor, 5 town board members, 1 planning board chairman, 1 district director for DEC. Somewhere along the line, someone's controlling a decision, and when you control a decision, you control a timeline. And I think, right to Rick's point, when you control a timeline and you don't understand the business need behind that, what that means to time to market, that's when we start getting estimates. I got an estimate from National Grid to do something, and it was my first dealing with estimates, so I'm not understanding why you're saying it could be $5 million or it could be $10 million. Well, there's so many uncertain costs along the way, like mitigation fees, host community benefits. You name the fee, there is one, and it fluctuates depending on who you talk to. We were lucky enough and unlucky enough to only be in 2 towns. Some of this stuff has to go hundreds of miles through many localities. And I'll end with thinking about, and offer you to think about this. As we talk about, and it's in the press and it's in at different times, as we talk about bringing a power line down the Hudson River, or we talk about bringing a gas line over from Vermont, that's, without doing a thing, that's millions and millions of dollars that need to be paid to those localities to permit those things to go through. And it's just not affordable for the end taxpayer. That's ultimately who has to pay for it. So thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you. Mike talks about those who control the decision-making, and as we look across the room, we see mayors, supervisors, assembly members, planning board members, and all the people in that pipeline. Rick talks about how there's been a benefit in New York from the vision at the top to be able to look and see how the state can play an important role in corralling and focusing incentives and adapting to the strong home rule state regulatory process that we live in. Bill has talked about the regional council's goal and the governor's desire to have a new New York open for business, and we can't ignore the business climate issues. And Steve has talked to us about the sustainability, the long term. We're in this for the long term to be sure that our children and our children's children benefit, as do we in the immediate term on the way we go about building our future. And Margaret, the governor's really put you in charge of this new model designed to rationalize the state's infrastructure investment. And as you hear from your perspective and working on projects statewide, although you are involved in each of the regions through the regional council, how do you see the new paradigm of rationalizing the state's infrastructure investment, relevant and looking at the relevant moving funding parts and funding streams to take care of that big pipe to get the gas down down through the interstates and across northwest, east, north, east, south, and west. But how do you bring it to the site, recognizing that we have 3 or 4 levels of government to get to a particular project, to attract a company, to make that decision to get in the ground?
Well, that's easy. And I actually do think it's not very complicated. I mean, I think what I would say is Americans, I think above many other things, are pragmatic. I do want to just say your incentives are our budget hole. I just need to say that.
Now and in the future.
And when you look at if you look at it as a pragmatic going concern, the political apparatus of New York, it's very clear that we have huge upside opportunity in terms of our economic engine, our economic growth. So it's, you put the dollars out with the hope that you're going to grow the economy. The question to me about a lot of the, say even just the power transmission as an example, the knock on somebody like a DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, is that they can't figure out how to get to a yes. The reason I think in general is that it's a very, we've talked a lot about ecosystems and about this, what I call the distributed network, but let's call it an ecosystem of decision making. If you look at something like, and I'm going to take why don't I take the Tappan Zee Bridge as just a simple example. It's really, it's transformational, blah, blah, blah. It's really we're replacing a bridge that's about to fall down. Like, if we can't figure that out, I sort of feel like we should just get in rowboats and row back and forth until we can figure it out. Because either we're going to have a new bridge that works, that everybody can drive back and forth on, or we're not. It's not that complicated. It's like reality wins in that case. So what happened there is the projections were it's going to take, and I think on average, a federal bridge of that, a federally funded bridge of that magnitude will take something like 6.9 years to get through regulatory review and approval. Governor Cuomo doesn't have that much patience, appointed himself as the project manager, and here we are, 11 months later, we have the bridge approvals in place, and we started construction. It's just not that complicated. Now, the idea is you can't have the governor in charge of every project, right? Because that doesn't work. So the question is, everybody in this room is now in charge of a project. So I'm going to go back to my friends at DEC. We have a New York Works project in Ithaca that's a flood control project. It's a $13 million budget, blah, 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 blah. The engineers do the feasibility study. It's hilarious. I mean, I think it was $30,000. Anyway, they come back with the engineering report, which I think I might have been the only person in the whole little group that actually read it. And I said, this is hilarious. They have $125 million that they came back to us with. I'm like, that's a joke, right? You guys are kidding me. So blah, 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 blah. I finally got all the engineer guys in Albany, and we sat down. We looked at it. I said, here's the thing. How many houses are we protecting? What's the average value of a house in Ithaca? Oh, we can buy all the real estate for $110 million, as opposed to doing flood control to protect them for $120. Like, that's what I'm talking about. That's stupid. We're not going to do it. We cannot afford to be like that any longer. So if it's perfectly obvious to everybody that getting a gas line from Vermont to New York makes sense, there's nothing standing in our way of just figuring out how to do that. What are the push-me, pull-me's? Who gets to decide and who's going to pay? I've decided after a year and a half, in this round of my time in government, those are the only 2 questions on the table. Who decides and who pays? And I will tell you, the second is a corollary of the first, right? Because if the business guy is going to get to decide, then we are all collectively going to pay. And if we all decide that we're going to do it, then we will figure out the most cost-effective way to get it done. Like, I'm not an expert at, impact on fisheries or whatever. So I'm not like a czar that's going to decide we can do the line or we can't do the line. But I am a convener, and we can pull together 100% of the people that need to be at the table to look at it and come up with the practical answer. And it's not because the town supervisor Malta is right or he isn't right. It's more like, what is it that we're all going to do together to grow the economy? We are in a global economy. We are having our lunch eaten, and we better figure this out. I mean, we don't really have a choice.
Thank you. Rick, you know firsthand our strengths and weaknesses, both in New York State and in our region. And as you look towards the next big thing, what three things in your dealings with our region and your knowledge of site selection and competitiveness throughout the world in these industries would you suggest that we focus on to improve our competitiveness?
Well, I think infrastructure is obviously the topic at hand today. You can't underestimate the infrastructure. I remember when we were working with Luther Forrest on attracting a large semiconductor company. The companies that came in and looked were extremely impressed with the fact that if the infrastructure wasn't already in place, their rights were obtained for the land to get it there, and the engineering had been done to get it there. So it was obviously, there was a plan in place to get there. Too many times we look at sites where it's you see the field and we'll get the infrastructure there in time with no commitment, no budget, no infrastructure already in place. So I think that's one. I do understand, Margaret, that incentives are a dirty word, and I wish from our perspective, from a designer and a builder, that we didn't have to work within an infrastructure-driven business because it does complicate things, it does slow things down. And that's the second item, is that it's that time to market. When we talk about selecting a facility, we look at how quickly can we get a shovel in the ground and get that facility underway. Once that's done, the client has a fairly good judgment of how long it will take to finish that facility. It's in the 18 to 20 months for these extremely large, complex facilities. But when they can't tell whether it's going to take them 3 months to get in the ground or 30 months to get in the ground, they can't make a decision. They can't plan. They can't understand when they're going to engage their capital. They can't understand when they're going to get a return on their capital. One of the areas that we have seen competing areas in the U.S., one of the best in class processes that we've seen is when jurisdictions have an authority. Essentially, if it's the municipality, the state, the county, the jurisdiction having that authority assigns a task force to manage a project, so that these large transformational projects don't go into the same process that approves whether you can put a canopy over the drive-through of the Dunkin' Donuts. Because there's a difference in complexity, there's a difference in the capital investment that just has to be recognized, and our clients are looking for that one-stop shop. And then finally, one of the issues that we're looking at is operational. Can this facility be sustained operationally long-term? Are the utilities affordable? Is the labor available? Do they have the flexibility to change and adapt that facility and grow that facility as time goes on? So that gets back again to is the infrastructure scalable in that area? So I'd say those are the three drivers that we see from our clients.
Thank you. We'd like to take some questions from the audience, and I know our time is getting tight because we have to get back to our table discussions. Is there someone who would like to start off with a question from the floor? Yes, sir.
Steve spoke about the fact that he believed that as our urban centers go, so goes the region. And I wonder if there's anybody on the panel that agrees with that. And if so, who makes those decisions, and what are the lessons learned from developing such a project as Luther Forrest as they apply to our urban centers, which I know would welcome this kind of, Marshall Plan to redevelop the downtown areas and so on?
I'll give it a try at first. I think the complexities of building infrastructure in the middle of a forest versus in a city are not the same. So what is challenging here, and what I think we've done done well at here, is if your cities, you have to have an opportunity for that urban lifestyle. That workforce they either want to be urban, they want to be rural, some want to be as far up in the mountains or farms or suburban, but that workforce is coming from and we're generating here a different type of lifestyle. So they need to have that city feel to it. You're not going to put a Luther Forest, I jokingly say, and I'm not picking on Troy, but if you look at the newspapers over the last couple of years, you're not going to put a facility in downtown Troy and suck 10 million gallons of water through the pipes, water lines in Troy. That's just not going to happen. But what is going to happen is we put that facility out in Luther Forest, and people live in downtown Troy who want to live in that downtown urban environment. And I think the city of Troy is doing a very good job at trying to create that environment. You have places like Saratoga, downtown Albany has done a tremendous job at trying to recreate what they're doing there. The people who make those decisions generally are the people who live there, not necessarily the people in the region. So that's a little complexity that we have to deal with as well. But that's what I would say in terms of providing our workforce just the opportunity to have 4 seasons up here, to be urban or rural, you pick it, and really driving a quality of life.
Bill?
Yeah, I'll take just a quick stab at that question as well. From a council's perspective, and thinking about urban centers as areas of growth or areas of economic drivers, certainly the council recognizes that our urban centers are absolutely economic drivers. And we've certainly supported that through one of our core 8 goals, which was to bring the cities to life of the capital region. We've heard about walkable communities this morning. I couldn't believe in that anymore. It's certainly something that we think is very important. But also we think about the diversity of the region. And when we're talking about the capital region right now, 8 counties, we have a diverse mix of urban and rural. And I think bringing some balance to your economic development plan is very important, especially as we think about driving engagement and alignment across the region. We have to ensure balance. So yes, we are absolutely driving at our urban centers as growth centers, but also looking at our rural areas and our working landscapes as economic drivers as well, and thinking about how do the two complement one another, because they do. And those are the types of things that we think about in terms of trying to link what we think to be the strengths of the region, which in a large case is our diversity. In that we have those choices. When we talk about a destination of choice, you have that choice to be part of an urban area or a rural area, and your economic growth comes from both of those and the symbiotic relationships that they're within. So,
I would add that transportation and training, so we can get the people who live in the urban areas to these tech parks throughout our region. Yes, sir.
When you look at limiting factors, when you consider what are the limiting factors, maybe you can give us some insight on the Luther Forest Technology Campus. It's there, the infrastructure is there, but there's really only one customer. Why is that?
Yeah. Well, I'll be brief and concise, but by no means is this the entire story. One, I think that we have identified ourselves, and I think the community, when I was asked to go up there and do what I did and helped with this team of people, we identified Luther Forest as a site for mega projects. Rick, I don't know how many you know, but how many mega projects are being built in the world right now? Not very many. So we can go into Luther Forest and we can build 30,000 square foot office buildings if we want, and not put them in Slingerlands and not put them in Latham. And then when it comes time to have another major mega facility of 1 million square feet or more with a volume of electricity that needs to be dealt with, we can go create another $250 million tech park to put that in. It doesn't make much sense to do that. So while at times there's a sentiment that we should be doing more, I would argue that we undersize the park to some degree, which I think, you know, when we started doing this, we said 10 million gallons a day of sewer capacity going out. Well, that's gone now, you know, in terms of growing it. And so when big facilities want to locate somewhere, they're looking at not just the infrastructure you can give them today, but what that plan build is over years. And so we're trying to do that now and put that plan into place. So it's not a simple task force, but we're staying true to the vision of we want another large, whether it be semiconductor or some other industry, large power, large water user to come into that park.
Fortunately, I'm getting the wrap-up sign, and so I'd like you all to take the questions that you have and bring them back to your tables to get the input and feedback and discussion amongst the people who you're sitting with. So I guess when we can wrap this up is who decides, who pays, how do we ensure that we have the infrastructure we need in the time to market that will ensure that customers will truly look at us, and then how do we sustain those operations using some of the things that have come out of the Cleaner, Greener Sustainability Program, and then how do all of us who are here today, who are on the Governor's Regional Council, work together to be sure that we are truly advancing business climate issues as well as quality of life issues to meet the Governor's vision of from the bottom-up economic development. And when we look at all of you here today and we look at the opportunity, I think the real answer to Margaret's question is who decides, and that is we decide, and we are that task force that Rick mentioned to be able to come together to try to ensure that our region is as competitive as any region on the globe to attract the next big thing. So we thank you, and we are now going to head back into the appreciative inquiry process with Dr. David Cooper-Ryder. Thank you all, and thank our panel. What a great job they've all done. We really appreciate their time and effort today.